Graylog elevates enterprise-level cybersecurity through its comprehensive SIM, centralized log management, and API security solutions. Built on the Graylog platform, Graylog Security combines SIM, security analytics, threat detection, and incident response capabilities. Unlike traditional SIMs, which offer complex and costly setups, Graylog Security simplifies security and operational challenges with an optimal blend of licensing, people, and infrastructure costs. To see a demo, visit securityweekly.com/Graylog. Do your end users always, and I mean always, without exception, work on company-owned devices and IT-approved apps? I didn't think so. So my next question is, how do you keep your company's data safe when it's sitting on all those unmanaged apps and devices? 1Password has an answer to this question: Extended Access Management. 1Password Extended Access Management helps you secure every sign-in for every app on every device because it solves the problems traditional IAM and MDM can't touch. Check it out at securityweekly.com/1password. ThreatLocker implements a least privileged approach to cybersecurity, blocking every executable unless specifically authorized by your team. This methodology mitigates ransomware, supply chain attacks, and zero-day exploits. It ensures 24/7, 365 protection for your organization. To learn more about how ThreatLocker can help prevent known and unknown threats in your digital environment, safeguard your data and operations from threat actors, and align your organization with compliance frameworks, visit securityweekly.com/ThreatLocker. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. This interview is sponsored by Tynes. Whitney Young joins us today to make a case for ditching your old, busted SOAR for a new, much improved model. Whitney is a solutions engineering manager at Tynes and focuses on helping customers understand how to get value out of the product during evaluations. Welcome to the show, Whitney.
Hey, Adrian, thanks for having me. I can't even hide that I'm not a salesperson or sponsoring the interview, so glad that's just out in the open.
Yeah, and I think that's fine. As long as we're not trying to hide that, we're transparent about it, and I think that's one of the things that helps Tynes is quite a bit as well, right? Like it's a product you can go use. You don't have to have 15 sales conversations to try out the product. I think that really helps a lot of security products out there because everybody's had the experience where 2 months in, they've been talking to salespeople. They haven't even had an opportunity to touch the product. And when they do, it doesn't meet their needs in some way, and it's 2 months of back and forth, time they'll never get back.
Yeah, our founders, Owen and TK, have always very much thought that transparency was super important. So even as I've been here for a couple of years now, seeing them maintain that. So we always have a free community edition, but with AI features coming out and stuff, making those available, even on the free tier, is, pretty inspirational. So great for anybody to go and use.
And did I characterize your job correctly? You're involved with a lot of POCs or POVs or whatever we're calling them today.
Yeah, I support on the pre-sale side as the technical resource. So I'm a manager now, but I was an SE for over 2 years at times. So I supported both our central region and also our West Coast. So it's interesting. I've seen a lot of legacy SOAR migrations, a lot of people that are just generally new to automation. So I feel like I've seen it all.
Yeah, and talking about that, is it I know with so one of the things we're talking about is the move away from traditional SOAR. And traditional SOAR, pretty much everybody was kind of pushed through the same POC experience, building the same automations, which tended to be, let's gather contextual data about phishing or something like that. And that was kind of the like hello world of SOAR for a while. So just curious to me, do you tend to do the same one each time, or do you ask the customer what they want to build, or how does that work?
Yeah, great question. So we always ask the customer, and typically we try to scope, I mean, depending on the POC and the prospect, at least 2 use cases. So for me personally, as an SE, when I know that they have a legacy SOAR tool already, I kind of try to recommend that we build out one use case that they already have running that's like a top priority, a critical use case for them that's already built in their existing SOAR. And then I also try to have them build something that they maybe haven't been able to build in their legacy system, whether that's because of a lack of integrations, they just haven't had the time, or something about it just makes it very difficult to do. But yeah, I would say that phishing is probably one of the most common use cases. Like you said, it's the hello world of SOAR. So a lot of SEs don't like to demo it or POC with it, but for me, I actually really like demoing it because I think everybody understands it so much
Right.
that it's really easy for them to quickly understand like how it works within times and maybe how it's a little bit different. And then we also have our story library, which is a lot of pre-built automations. So we
Mhm.
have a dozen different phishing use cases that vary, with different tech stacks or kind of like what the remediation might be. And so that's always a really great jumping off point too for people to kind of start there if they, want to implement quicker and not necessarily start from scratch.
Yeah, and I think that library and the fact that you don't even have to create an account to look at stuff that's in the library, I think is very compelling for the product. But one thing I'm not clear on, the library, is that stuff that Tines has created or customers have created, or is it a mix of both?
It's actually a mix of both. So, anybody at times, mostly it's the technical builders at times, will build stuff. We have kind of an internal process and partner pairings for reviewing it and stuff like that. And we also have a labs team that is 3 people at times, and their kind of main focus is building out content. So, staying relevant, updating things that might have changed. But then we also have that community aspect as well. So,
Mhm.
anybody can go onto our website, view the story library, and then they can either upload a story that they built, or suggest a story. So if there's a pre-built automation that they're looking for that we don't have, that actually goes as a ticket to our labs team to work on. Of course, if somebody uploads a story, it still goes through our formal review process. It's not just immediately published, but it's nice. You can see if it was from community. And then we also actually just did our annual You Did What with Times competition, which
Yeah.
is yeah, pretty cool. So we'll have different category winners. I actually was on the judging panel for that. So all of those submissions will go into the story library as community submissions.
And before we get into more technical details, I think it might be fun just I love that you have a contest like that, but maybe throw out some ideas of things people have built with Tines, that are not the typical Hello World that they're familiar with. Maybe some that are a little bit outside the box that you've seen.
Yeah, I think from my perspective as an SE, I think some of the most interesting things I've seen have been, of course, outside of even security. So
Hmm.
IT use cases, engineering. I mean, internally, we use Tines for everything. I've also seen it built in like a Tines page actually embedded in somebody's website and it's serving as the web application. So I think stuff like that is really cool. All of the technical builders at Tines definitely have our own kind of like unique use cases that are not security based just because the tool is so flexible. So as you can see in my background, I have lots of plants.
Yeah.
So in the winter time, our outside plants go into a shed, and if we have, a smart thermometer that has an API, we have a smart plug that has an API. And so basically, if the thermometer goes below a certain temperature, right, I have a time story running in the background to automatically kick on the switch to that then runs a heater to heat them up and keep them safe. So it's really cool that Times can just really do anything, as long as you can kind of think of it and the API supports it. For the competition too, we saw some like a couple of smishing stuff, a lot of stuff with CrowdStrike,
Yeah.
Jamp too. So it's yeah.
Yeah, that's something I want to call out about Tines that I found was really interesting, because my experience with the traditional SOAR tools, which two of the bigger ones out there, I've got personal experience with, is that you have to build a some kind of connector. Like most of them have this idea of this connector. It's built in Python. Sometimes only one customer's asking for something. So you end up seeing a lot of these connectors that are kind of thrown together really quickly. They don't include all the API elements, and maybe one thing changes on the third party side, and the API changes, and it's all broken and nobody fixes it. So you find I've found a lot of that. Whereas with Tines, the fact that you don't have to build a connector, that you can just use the raw API to complete your, having, you know, needing to go through a list of integrations, is not a showstopper. Is basically what I'm trying to say. Like that was huge for me.
Yeah, and when we start talking to prospects that have a legacy SOAR tool in place, right, one of the first things we're trying to find out is why are they potentially
Mhm.
migrating? And I would say integrations is definitely one of the top reasons. So while they might support an integration with a tool, maybe it doesn't support all the endpoints that would otherwise be available, or maybe they're trying to connect to like an internal system that has an API,
Right.
right? Like the legacy SOAR tool doesn't really have much incentive to actually build and support that integration. So with Tines, of course, it's just completely flexible. We do prioritize, even though I think that not having integrations for people that are familiar with legacy SOAR either is people respond to either really well, or at first I think there's a lot of skepticism associated, or they just don't really understand, or they think that it ends up being a lot more like work for them to create the HTTP requests and stuff. So similar to our story library, we do have a template library with thousands of pre-built HTTP requests to hit those API endpoints. Again, like a big point of Times and something that's we focus on is being able to, time to implement and speed with that.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
continuing to keep up with those and add those new ones is definitely a priority.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that because that's exactly where I was going with the next question was implementation time or time to value is really critical for security products. I remember back when I was an industry analyst at 451 Research, my colleague Javad Malik did a report on shelfware on the different products that would end up as shelfware, like they wouldn't get fully deployed or they weren't creating value for the security organization, and they tended to be those products with those long, grueling implementation times, and people just run out of gas and move on to the next project, right? And SOAR, I feel like the first generation of SOAR products shouldn't have been that bad on implementation time, but somehow it was. It was just the way it was set up was so complex. There was always something that broke, and you know the troubleshooting was difficult. I mean, just getting them up and running was a lot of work. I used to use community versions of those tools, and just want to get like an idea. I don't know if you actually have the metrics, but how much faster are we talking than the original or previous generation of SOAR tools here?
So dependent on the prospect's use cases. Um, I will say too, it depends. Are we starting from scratch, or like I think in the migration from a legacy SOAR tool to Tines, like I personally have a customer where they had a very tight time frame, so just over 60 days. Like they utilized our professional services they built, and we were able to migrate, I think, 45 stories over within that time, like pretty easily. Obviously,
But
when
they
somebody's
already knew
thinking about
exactly what they wanted to build, right?
right, so that was scoped. I do think that when people are migrating from legacy SOAR, there's definitely opportunity to optimize the way that they are doing things. Obviously, the way that you build in times is a little bit differently. So I think it's always interesting to see if people are open to that, or some people want to stick with kind of like, this is our process, this is how we do it, and we want to do it the exact same way and build it one to one, which is easy because then you're just going in and building. I personally prefer when they're open to making a more efficient process and kind of
Right.
refactoring and taking a look again at like how they think about the use case itself, and kind of where we can improve on it, maybe add to it if the integration wasn't supported previously. Like, how can Times continue to like iterate and extend on that? But yeah, I mean, I think we have a case study with Mars that they were able to migrate 200 workflows from their legacy SOAR tool to Times in less than 6 months and onboard
Mhm.
5 different teams at Mars. So I think that's a pretty good metric. But again, it varies so much depending on the prospect.
Yeah, yeah, and I can really relate to that because before I even got into security in the early 2000s, and I was on the IT side, one of my first jobs at a large payment processor was to find all these automated jobs and centralize them, put them all in one place. Some of them they were all just written in whatever the person knew, right? Like some of them were shell scripts, some of them were written in Visual Basic and had GUIs, some of them were written in Crystal reports. Some of them were under people's desks. They had like an extra PC, and that's where they ran this critical process for the business. And I really enjoyed that process of centralizing all of them. But yeah, in one case, one of these processes, the code was so bad it turned into a full time job for the person that was babysitting it. And once I got done unconvoluting it, it was like a 5 line shell script. Yeah, it was it was a real case of replacing someone with a small shell script. And I imagine you see a lot of those cases where you don't want to just lift and shift it. Like I imagine there's similar stories with people moving from private data centers to the cloud. Like you could do that, but I imagine that some of your job is to point out, you don't need these 5 steps right here. That could just be one step.
Right, or just the flexibility of being able to bring in, data sources from multiple platforms into the same automation, I think, is sometimes really surprising to people, but yet it's so native to Tines that I don't necessarily realize that's gonna be something where just the building process, I think, too, with, like, the ability of how you can re-emit events and test in Tines, honestly makes the building process pretty seamless, and, I mean, I think building in Tines is really fun. But yeah, it's always, challenging when I ask somebody, "Oh, well, why are you doing it that way?" And their response is, "Well, we've just always done it that way." And that's when I kind of know, okay, maybe there's room to transition away and into something a little bit more efficient.
And delight the customer, right? Like there's not a lot of opportunities in security to delight a customer, but I think anytime you uncomplicate something, you have that opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah,
So most of times for people who haven't used it, it's you can build you can use code, you can write code, right? I imagine most of it's probably Python, but you don't need to for most things. I would imagine, and at least for what I've played around with it, it's all no code. If you've used something like uh, if this and that, I think is like the consumer equivalent of this. This the kind of how I mentally think about this is like a an enterprise version of that. And I don't know how many people can relate to that. I've used that in the past, but
I hear
uh,
that comparison pretty frequently.
yeah,
But yeah, you can still run Python. I think that sometimes people already have like a complex script that's doing some sort of data
right.
transformation. And especially if we're on a tight timeline to migrate, maybe it makes sense just to pop that into Tines. With our we use functions for all of our data transformation, so very similar to Excel
Mhm.
formulas. And then we recently released another mode of that that's called our automatic transform. So it's an AI feature where you can basically just in plain text tell the AI how to transform the data. And I feel that that kind of reduced a lot of the need for really any Python in that regard. Obviously, we still see it when somebody needs to connect to like an internal server or something like that that doesn't have an
Yeah.
API. We're always going to need code for that and continue to, support that.
Yeah, and is there some how do people connect with stuff that's not internet exposed? I guess if they do have something internal, yeah, how does that work?
Yeah, we have a couple of different approaches to that. So the first one is called our tunnel. It's basically just a
Mhm.
reverse proxy. So that's what we would use if the internal system has an API available. So self-hosting Splunk or Jira, they both still expose the API. So we can just run it that way. You build in Tines the same way. Once you deploy the tunnel, you just basically check that you're using the tunnel with that HTTP request. And then if it doesn't have an API, we use something that we call command over HTTP. That's basically just deploying a container that allows us to execute the code. So we support Python, PowerShell, and Bash. So we see this a lot with like Microsoft, like Intra ID, previously Active Directory on prem. Microsoft doesn't expose an API, so we have to connect to it programmatically. And like we talked about Times' transparency earlier, all of this stuff is public in our docs too, if
Mhm.
anybody is curious.
Yeah, and tell me more about the. So we are talking about the. You said similar to Excel functions. You know the way you handle data transforms, and you have an AI driven component that helps build these. Correct?
Yeah, I actually think that a lot of even the SEs and customer success engineers have really shifted to that. So even if you're very educated in using times and using functions, if you're in a hurry or you just don't really feel like building it out as functions, using the automatic transform is honestly, I think it's probably one of the coolest things I've seen come out at times in the 2.5 years I've been here. Just the impact that it has on the builder and the ease of use and kind of the barrier of entry to being successful with the tool is pretty incredible.
So walk me through how that works. Like I know I've got some maybe some input data, and I need to transform it for a particular output to pass on to something else. I imagine, and there'd be a prompt interface, and I would just say, hey, this input I need, is JSON, and I need it to be CSV, for example.
Yeah, exactly. So in the same way that we would typically pass dynamic data from an upstream action, right? You just set that, we call them pills, but you set that path to the variable data and then you just prompt it. So you'd say, can like turn this into a CSV. And it actually is really nice because it immediately will run it's actually a Python script, and then it will show you the output. It also give you
Oh,
any
cool.
errors if maybe you need to adjust your prompt. So you can immediately validate if your prompt is accurate and giving you the output that you want, and then you can save it, go from there. But it was also nice for people that love Python and are just really comfortable
Mm,
with that. Let's say maybe it's like not exactly what you wanted. You can always, we actually have an option directly in the modal to copy that as a run script. So you can
mhm.
paste that as an action and then just go and edit the raw Python as well if that's your vibe.
Very cool. Yeah, yeah. So kind of like a GitHub Copilot, built into the product, basically.
Mhm. Yeah. So great for data transformation. And just allowing you to kind of even more so like refactor stuff. So being able to do a lot of data transformation kind of like in a single step. So yeah, you definitely check it out. It's in our community edition.
So it seems like a lot of the stuff Tynes is building is just kind of finding those places where people get stuck, and productivity stops. The thing you're building, there's some friction point, or at this point you would normally go off and have to write some code, or you'd have to request Tynes build a connector, or your previous SOAR vendor build something for you, and you'd have to just wait for it, or maybe you pay professional services to do it. It seems like you're kind of systematically, or Tynes is systematically going around finding these bottlenecks and just building stuff to, help people push through them.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely seen a push with AI. So I think that everybody's doing that. We're seeing that everywhere. And so I think we've done it in a really thoughtful way of making sure that it has a profound impact on the usability of the tool, and that it's something that you can actually really benefit from. We also have an AI action, which works a little bit differently. It's less focused on data transformation and more just on like general AI, but same
Right.
thing, just passing it a
As
prompt.
just a step in
And then
your, yeah,
mhm,
in your
yeah,
automation.
yeah, so it's
Yeah.
one of our actions, core actions. And then we recently, you kind of talked about this earlier, but we recently last week released Workbench, which is basically an AI chat that allows you to interact with your automation. So it's all powered by Times. And again, that just kind of goes back to making it easier for the people that are using Times or interacting with Times, right? So I think we've been thoughtful about the way that we've approached AI.
Yeah, so it sounds like that's something where you're talking about somebody in 6 months moving 200 plus stories over. I imagine that Workbench comes in really handy once you have a whole bunch of stuff and you're looking for specific things, or maybe one of the components, 40 of those stories depend on you're moving to a different vendor or something like that. So you need a list of all those that you're going to have to update because you're moving from one HR product to another HR product, for example.
Yeah, and again, Times has a lot of pre-built templates, so it's actually when you're using Workbench as easy as going in and just authenticating it. So if it's an OAuth credential, and we have these
Mhm.
workflows kind of built into Times as well, or a text credential and API key. And once you pop that in, we'll have a list of the different kind of like endpoints that we support. And if for some reason there's something that we don't have a template for, then it can be powered by like a time story, so especially if you're taking like multiple actions in one step. But it's great for like I think building in Tines is different than the way that you're interacting with the data in Tines. So obviously, like from an analyst perspective, that's working cases every day, right? The idea isn't that they're going into the raw automation and looking at the JSON, right? It's that we're sending that data somewhere else, whether it's an external case management system or ours or Slack or Teams, right? Wherever they're living to, again, just make their life easier and save time so they're not going to multiple tools. And so at the idea of Workbench, let's say you're using cases, it'll have the context of everything that's in that case. And then you're able to say, okay, now, go to AWS and give me this information about this S3 bucket. And then I need information also about this employee, right? Then you can do all of those things from a single interface
Oh,
to
wow,
kind of,
okay.
yeah.
So that yeah, that sounds more powerful than what I was thinking. So you're talking about getting more data than just information about the workflows and how they're constructed, but actually receiving data back from different things that you have integrated, right? That you have integrations with.
Yeah, exactly. And then even from there, obviously being able to take the remediation action. So if an S3 bucket is open, right, we can use AWS, CLI or the API to go and apply that public block
Oh,
policy.
wow.
Or we can, in this case, if we know, okay, this user has been compromised, reset their sessions and their passwords, notify them, right? To really like from total end-to-end use case, being able to just focus on it through Workbench, kind of provide the analyst everything that they need.
Oh, so you're blowing my mind a bit. So this is almost like I've got an ad hoc one-off thing I need to do. So instead of building a story, I can just go use Workbench to just do it.
If we have a template for it, you might need a story if it's like a very specific thing that you're doing,
Okay.
but it is powered by a story. So anything
Oh,
that you
okay.
have in Tines. And I think what's nice there too is I think that we can all agree that there's been a bit of a lack of security when just in AI in general. And so this is nice because it's all within Tines already. So it's all already very secure. And then you can give very specific access to different users of what
Mhm.
actions they're actually allowed to take.
Right.
Right. So if like I am just an analyst one, I might not be able to do
Open and
serious
close S3
remediation
bucket.
actions.
Yeah.
Right, and then, of course, audit logs, as well, so you can look back on see if somebody did do something that maybe shouldn't have been done.
Right. Right. But yeah, with so many stories in the library, the chances that there's something in there that can do the thing that you want to do, like make a S3 bucket not public, is probably pretty high for a lot of common actions.
Yeah, and that's even just a single template that we have available, so you don't even have to build a story for that. For a lot of them, you don't, for,
Mm.
like, specific actions, but you can always go in and see. Again, we have Workbench in the community edition, so, all of the templates we have available will be public.
Wow. Okay. Very cool. Yeah, and I do have a account for the community edition for this. It's something I've been wanting to play with more. I actually need to move some of my automations from some other platforms that aren't really working for me. So I'm excited to check out some of these newer features. So we covered implementation time is definitely a big difference between new and old. Talking about the current generation of SOAR products versus the older ones. I think the community aspect of it was somewhat there with the older ones, but a lot of those things like you had to be able to write code to contribute to the community for to share a lot of that stuff, and I think that really limited the community sharing there. So I would still consider that a pretty big differentiator between the old and the new. Is any other differences that we're missing there that we haven't touched on yet?
I mean, I think that a huge difference is everybody's bought a tool where they buy it, they are getting great pre-sale support, they buy it, and then they become a customer, and that
Yeah,
drops off.
yeah.
And so I think that and I'm not even on the post-sale side, but I think one of the biggest differentiators.
There's no customer success team?
No, there is, I'm just not on it. But yeah,
Right, right.
we
No, I'm
have a
saying
whole
in some experiences
yes,
we've all had,
there's
yeah,
maybe
you
a
just get
support team,
yeah,
right, but they don't have,
yeah,
like, the foundational knowledge of that team. And so all of our customers go through onboarding. We have a very much the mentality of and philosophy of building the builder. So like we really want our customers to be successful. We want them to be able to build. Like we don't want them to be blocked if they have questions. So we do a lot of co-building sessions, right? So on the pre-sale side and the POC. That looks like me kind of walking you through step by step. This is how we would approach this with the knowledge that I have and like the expertise, right? Times is so flexible that we want to make sure you're doing it in the best way. And so we have that same we have a customer success engineers and managers on the post sale side, and I really think that the customer support that people get at times and the way that we value product feedback to
mhm.
continue to drive the product in a way that's best for our users is very special.
Yeah, I've been looking at products a long time. I've put together a database of all the companies and products in the industry a couple years ago, and I've worked at several vendors, and I think you've touched on some of the key things that I think make some of the favorites out there. You know, some of the people's favorite products out there, because those are some of the key things that key mistakes I think other vendors miss is not incorporating that feedback loop from customers on what matters, and not supporting them, yeah, after they become a customer. And it's plain to see too. It's you talk about the community effort. I'm in private Slacks where the only product that has a dedicated channel is Tines, and there's just a channel for Tines ideas in one of the private Slacks I'm in, and you don't see that with any other security vendor. So I found that very revealing. I think in how much people love the product and enjoy using the product.
Yeah, I think even as like what's interesting about Tines too is that all of the technical users, like I at the end of the day am a Tines user, like I'm very much a consumer of the tool, whereas I think depending on what the product is, like if you're selling a database or something, like you're not really using it. And so we are
Right.
so I think just like excited every day to be building in Tines and to be kind of like given new problems to solve and ways to think about things or see that like learn something from our customers and be like, wow, that was such a cool way to do that. I never thought of that. And then continue to knowledge share. So we also have a community Slack workspace as well. That's great for knowledge
Oh, okay.
sharing and everything too. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Whitney, thank you so much for joining me today on Enterprise Security Weekly. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, make sure you visit securityweekly.com/Tines to learn more. And we'll be right back in a few moments with the weekly enterprise news.